Live classes. This is Dr. Divya, live class educator for Auricle. So in the exam mastery classes, we are doing rapid revision of all the important questions. We are covering all the volatile facts as well as high-yielding topics from all subjects. And most expected questions in the university exams will also be covered. So this is beneficial for all the university exams of all the states, as well as for NEET PG and FMGE exams. So today's exam mastery live class, we'll be dealing with fourth ventricle, topics related to fourth ventricle and cerebrum. So all the long essays and short essay questions as well as short answer questions will be covered from these topics. So before we dive into the class, let us understand some core features of Auricle. So in Auricle, we offer you live classes as well as recorded classes, which you can access at anytime, anywhere at your convenience. And we also give you notes, that is CBME-based question and answers, MCQs. And there is this fun zone also for self-assessment. And these MCQs are ranging from the beginner level to the expert level. And they're all standard multiple choice questions asked in the university exams as well as the competitive exams. So we have 3 subscription plans: the basic, standard, and the mentorship program. Basic is for 3 months, standard 6 months, and mentorship is for 12 months. So in addition to the features offered in basic and standard, we also offer you one-to-one personalized guidance as well as notes in the mentorship program. So you can use the code Dr. Divya 20 for the discount on subscription. So welcome to today's class. So today we shall be doing, as I said, the long essay, short essays, and short answers. So before we start into the class, let me just announce you that in Auricle, we'll be conducting the weekly tests. Okay, so mock tests on Sundays. So the portion will be given on Saturdays and the test will be conducted on Sundays. So you can make the best use of these tests and prepare well for your. So here these long essay questions and short essay questions. So we have given the code here, like it basically stands for the year and which syllabus, like, the RS3 or RS4. And which year it is asked. So the commonly repeatedly asked questions we'll be dealing during these exam mastery live classes. So this long essay question, describe the superior lateral surface of cerebral hemisphere under the following headings. So it was asked in January 13 and January 14 RS3 batch. So we need to describe the superior lateral surface of the cerebral hemisphere under these headings. Okay, so when it is specifically given, you can just describe what is asked. You don't have to deviate from anything which is not asked. Okay, so the lobes of the cerebral hemisphere. So how we define the lobes of the cerebral? So this is the superior lateral surface. So the area of the cerebrum in front of the, okay, so area of the cerebrum in front of the central sulcus. This is the central sulcus. So area in front of that will be the frontal lobe. Okay. So to define the other lobes, we draw an imaginary line which extends from the parieto-occipital sulcus to the notch. Okay. So up to the preoccipital notch it extends. Another line, actually it is shifted here. So the second line is from the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus. Okay, this is the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus, from there up to the first imaginary line. Okay, so the portion of the cerebrum above, okay, so the portion of the cerebrum above the second imaginary line and in behind the central sulcus, okay, which is bounded. So superiorly it will be bounded by the superomedial border, then behind by the central sulcus, and below by the second imaginary line. Okay, and in front by this one, that is the parieto-occipital. So this is the parietal lobe. Okay, so parietal lobe is here. And the area of the cerebrum behind the first imaginary line, which is drawn from the parieto-occipital sulcus up to the preoccipital notch, becomes the occipital lobe. And the temporal lobe lies below the posterior, this is the lateral sulcus and the posterior ramus of lateral sulcus. So below that, and below the second imaginary line drawn from the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus up to the first imaginary line, and in front of the lower part of the first imaginary line. So this portion is temporal lobe. Next is the second part of it. So sulci and gyri. Okay, sulci and gyri. So sulci and gyri here we have like in each lobe we need to mention. Okay, so sulcus and gyrus. So now the central sulcus we have here. So in front of that will be the precentral gyrus, and in front of that will be the precentral sulcus. Okay, so with the diagram you need to write this. Actually, for this sulci and gyri, if you draw a big diagram and label it, that will be more than enough. Okay, and here you will have superior frontal and superior and inferior frontal sulcus, which divides this portion into superior frontal gyrus, middle frontal gyrus, and inferior frontal gyrus. And in the inferior frontal gyrus, okay, here this is the lateral sulcus is divided into two. Okay, and anterior horizontal, anterior ascending, and a posterior ramus. Okay, so this we call it as the pars orbitalis. This is pars triangularis, and this portion we call it as pars opercularis. Okay, so these are the sulci and gyri in the frontal lobe. Then in the parietal lobe here, we have the central sulcus. So behind the central sulcus will be the postcentral gyrus. Okay, and behind that will be the postcentral sulcus. Now from this postcentral sulcus, one more sulcus will be there, that is known as the intraparietal sulcus. Okay, so intraparietal sulcus will divide this parietal lobe, this portion, into superior parietal lobule and inferior parietal lobule. Then coming to the occipital lobe, you will see the calcarine sulcus. This is the pre-occipital, this is the lunate sulcus. Okay, this is lunate sulcus here, and there will be lateral sulcus. Then in the temporal lobe, we have the superior and inferior temporal sulcus, which divides it into superior, middle, and inferior temporal gyrus. So you don't even have to draw the cerebrum. You can just show this portion and show all the sulci and gyri. Okay, it's the same thing here. In addition to, see, this was the pars orbitalis, triangularis, and opercularis part. Here, no, in the parieto-occipital lobe, at the upturned end of the posterior ramus, we have what we call it as the angular gyrus. Supramarginal gyrus, and above this superior temporal sulcus, we have the angular gyrus. Okay, so these are the sulci and gyri on the surface of the superolateral surface of the cerebrum. Now coming to the functional areas. Okay, so functional areas. So each lobe, what are the functional areas? Okay, so we have now again identify the central sulcus. So in front of the sulcus, we have the primary motor area, that is area number 4. Area number 4. So the pyramidal tracts have the origin here. Okay, so it basically controls the voluntary movements of the opposite half of the body. Then in front of that, we have the premotor area, area number 6. Area number 6, the extrapyramidal tracts, okay, are present there. They originate from there. So this area basically coordinates an intended voluntary movement. Then here in the superior middle, this superior middle and inferior frontal gyrus we have. So here we have in the middle, the posterior part, we have area number 8, which is known as the frontal eye field. So frontal eye field basically controls the voluntary movements of the eye with movement. Okay, so the eyes move according to some object moving voluntarily. So that is controlled by this frontal eye field. Then we have in front of that the prefrontal area, area number 9, 10, 11. And this area is concerned with social, moral, ethical behavior, concentration, okay, memory, and all those things. This is the prefrontal area. Then we have here, that is pars triangularis and pars opercularis, area number 44 and area number 45. So area number 44 and 45, they are the primary motor speech area. So it is the Broca's area. Okay, it's also called as Broca's area. So basically it is controls the articulation So it's responsible for the articulation. So basically supplies from here the muscles above the larynx, pharynx, and the tongue. Okay, they are controlled by this area. Okay, so this is in the which one? The frontal lobe. Now behind the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is basically sensory. This frontal lobe is motor cortex. This is the sensory cortex. So behind the central sulcus, okay, we have this area that is the postcentral gyrus, which we call it is the primary somatosensory area. So area number 321. Okay, so basically the sensations of pain, touch, temperature, vibration, proprioception, ectoreceptive sensations, exteroceptive sensations are carried by here. What we should remember here is whether it is in the motor area or the sensory area, the body is represented upside down. Okay, that is inverted homunculus, we say. That means the head region will be here. Okay, head is represented. So wherever the muscles like, very intrinsic muscles, finer movement muscles are responsible. That area is represented as a larger area of representation. So head will be represented large here. Then the trunk, body, limbs and all. And in this, in the upper end, okay, and towards the medial surface, we'll have the perineal region, perineum represented there. Then above that is the supraparietal lobule. Okay, that is the intraparietal sulcus would have divided the remaining of the parietal lobe into supra and infraparietal lobule. So supraparietal lobule, area number 5 and 7, that is the area for stereognosis. That is when with closed eyes we are able to identify, okay, feel the size, shape of the object and texture of the object and identify what it is. So that is 5-7. Then here the supramarginal gyrus and the angular gyrus, area number 40 and 39. Okay, angular is 39 and supramarginal is 40. So this is sensory speech area. Okay, sensory speech area is also called as Wernicke's area. So these Broca's area, Wernicke's area, one thing you should remember is it is present in the dominant hemisphere. Okay, so sensory speech area is responsible for the understanding, okay, and then the response. Okay, so like when we ask a question to the patient understands what is this. If we ask, he will say this is a pen, okay, or a pencil. So to understand the question and give you a response, this area is responsible. That is the sensory speech area. Then we have in the occipital lobe, area number 17, that is around the calcarine sulcus. That is the primary visual area. So it is responsible for the perception of vision. Like, we are able to see the color, we are able to see things. So that is visual area. Area number 18 and 19 is visual association area. So how do they help is with our knowledge, with the previous knowledge, we are able to identify the color, okay, color, shape, and all those things, seeing. So that is visual association area. Then we have on the superior anterior part of the superior anterior, listen carefully, it is on the anterior part of the superior surface of the superior temporal gyrus. We have the primary auditory area, area number 41 and 42. Okay, so auditory area, primary auditory area, we're able to hear the sound, okay, based on its pitch and loudness and all those things, we are able to hear the sound. And on the lateral surface of the superior temporal gyrus, we have area number 22, that is secondary auditory area or auditory association area. That is, with our knowledge, previous knowledge, we are able to identify the sound, whether it is the sound of the bell or the clock ticking or of a bird singing, the different sounds we are able to identify with the secondary auditory area. So only the speech area is present in the dominant hemisphere. Rest of the areas, they have bilateral representation. Next, when we talk about the blood supply, okay, so blood supply, basically the cerebrum, entire cerebrum is supplied by 3 arteries, anterior, middle, and posterior cerebral arteries. Okay, so here along the superior-medial border, a small portion is supplied by the anterior cerebral artery. So most of the superior lateral surface is supplied by the middle cerebral artery. lower part of the temporal and the occipital lobe is supplied by the posterior cerebral artery. So major artery supplying the superior lateral surface is the middle cerebral artery. Okay, now these cerebral arteries will give three types of branches: cortical, central, and choroidal. So cortical branches, no, they supply the outer portion of the cortex. So outside we have the cortex, inner is medulla, right? That is the white matter. So it supplies. So in this cortex, we have two kinds, longer ones and the short ones. Okay, so longer ones will actually supply the entire cortex as well as a small portion of white matter. Okay, just a peekaboo kind of thing. It just peeps in there a little bit and supplies that white matter. Whereas the shorter branches, they are restricted only to the cortex. Then we have central branches. Central branches are very thin-walled perforating branches which will supply the entire, that is all the centrally located parts like corpus striatum, internal capsule, etc. Okay. Then we have the third group, that is the choroidal arteries, which will form a network. Okay, so these choroidal arteries, they will form a network of capillaries and they are present in relation to the cavity of the different parts of the brain. Okay, so basically that cavity forms the ventricle. So they project into the ventricles after invaginating the layers of pia mater and the ependyma, and they form the choroid plexus. So venous drainage in the brain, no, it is not similar to the, it doesn't correspond. The veins, there are no corresponding veins. Okay. Instead here, what happens, there are many superior cerebral veins. They are about 8 to 12 in number and they drain the upper part of the superior lateral, drains this upper part of the superior lateral surface and the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere, all the cerebral veins. Okay, so they will ascend upwards and pierce the arachnoid matter and traverse the subdural space and enters the superior sagittal sinus. So here for this, in the center, those so the which one we have, the superficial middle cerebral vein, no, this one. So here it will have an anastomotic channel, that is the superior anastomotic vein of Troland, we say, okay, by which it will be connected to the superior sagittal sinus. And inferiorly also there will be an inferior anastomotic vein of Labe. Okay, so this is the inferior anastomotic vein by which will be connected to the transverse sinus. Okay, so that is how the drainage occurs. So that is about the first question. So briefly with the diagram. So blood supply diagram you need to draw, Salkai-Gyri diagram you need to draw with the functional areas. Next question is hypothalamus. So this was asked in February 21 RS4 batch. So here the extent, the gross features, relations and functional importance of hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system is asked. So we'll go one by one. Okay, so hypothalamus, yes. So when we say what hypothalamus, first you should write the definition. What do you mean by hypothalamus? So hypothalamus is the part. So this is the hypothalamus. So it is a part of the diencephalon which lies below the, this is the thalamus part, which lies below the thalamus is hypothalamus. Okay. So so basically the hypothalamus, it controls the three systems, that is the autonomic nervous system, the endocrine system, as well as the limbic system. Okay. And it helps to maintain the homeostasis. So that is why it is very important. So coming to the extent and boundaries of it. Okay. So here, how will you say what are the boundaries? So also remember that the hypothalamus is called as the head ganglion of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, because it is the principal center for the control of autonomic nervous system. Okay, so boundaries here anteriorly. Now here if you see anteriorly, okay, there is the lamina terminalis. So this is the lamina terminalis. Okay, anteriorly the lamina terminalis. And posteriorly will be the subthalamus. Okay, posteriorly this side will be the subthalamus. Inferiorly will be the, so this is the inferior part. Inferior, the structures in the floor of the third ventricle, that is tuber cinerum. Okay, so you can see here the tuber cinerum, the infundibulum are present. And mammillary bodies. Okay, so here, so this is the inferior. Okay, so that is the infundibulum here. Okay, tuber cinerum. This is tuber cinerum, the tuber cinerum, and then the infundibulum and the mammillary bodies. Superiorly, it is thalamus, and laterally there is, like, when we have taken the section, but laterally when we see, there is the internal capsule, and medially this is the cavity of the third ventricle. So those are the boundaries. Next is subdivisions. Okay, so here the hypothalamus is divided into two lateral halves by the cavity of the third ventricle, okay, and an imaginary plane. So here, if you see, the anterior column of the fornix will traverse this hypothalamus and it will reach the mammillary body. Okay, so this serves as a point of reference for a sagittal, okay, in a parasagittal plane that divides the hypothalamus into a medial zone and a lateral zone. Okay, so here if you see, we will have the medial zone will be again divided into two, that is thin ependymal or periventricular zone and a thicker intermediate zone. Okay, so in the subdivisions, we have three zones, that is the periventricular zone, the intermediate zone, which both belong to the medial zone, and the lateral zone. Then the hypothalamus is also divided from anterior to posterior, anterior-posteriorly into regions, four regions. One is the preoptic region, then there is the supraoptic region, then there is the tuberal region, and there is the mammillary region. Okay, so when we say preoptic will have preoptic region is in relation to the lamina terminalis. Okay, supraoptic, as the name says, it lies. This is the optic chiasma, so it lies above that, above the optic chiasma. And tuberal region will include the tuber cinerum region, the infundibulum portion, and these things around it. And mammillary region includes the mammillary bodies and the area around it. Okay, so in relation to the boundaries only, we have the different subdivisions. Okay, this is anterior-posterior subdivision. The previous was into zones. Okay, lateral and medial zone. Okay. Now you should understand these nuclei. Okay, so which are the hypothalamic nuclei? So it has got many small nuclear masses. Okay, nuclei is basically collection of the cell bodies within the central nervous system. We call it as the nuclei. Okay, so now depending on each region, there are different nuclei. Now this is the preoptic region, right? So in preoptic region, there is preoptic nucleus. So what does this preoptic nucleus do? It releases the gonadotropin hormone. Okay, it really regulates the release of the gonadotropin hormone. Then in the supraoptic we have three. That is the supraoptic nucleus, the paraventricular nucleus, and the anterior nucleus. Okay. So supraoptic and paraventricular region now, this will produce what? Antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Isn't it? It's secreted by that. And this anterior nucleus here, okay. So anterior nucleus here is basically regulates the body temperature by dissipation of heat. It dissipates the heat and regulates the body temperature. So basically it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Then in the infundibular region, okay, or tuberal region, we have okay, in this region, we have the arcuate nucleus. Now, this is the arcuate nucleus or infundibular nucleus. So, this nucleus produces the hypothalamic releasing factors. Then we have the ventromedial and the dorsomedial nucleus. So, ventromedial nucleus is considered as a satiety center to stimulate the release of basically on its stimulation. It has the satiety center, no? So on stimulation, what happens? It inhibits the urge to heat. Okay, whereas the dorsomedial nucleus, it causes obesity because it's in relation to, okay. So this is the dorsomedial nucleus. So its stimulation, it will result in obesity. So this one, it what is that? Stimulation inhibits the urge to eat, but this one, it is a stimulation will cause the urge to eat. Okay, so they will have a savage behavior. They eat a lot when this area is affected. That is the dorsomedial nucleus. Then we have in the mammillary region, we have the posterior nucleus. Posterior nucleus regulates the body temperature by conserving the heat. Okay, so basically stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. And then we have the mammillary body. Okay, mammillary, it receives the input from the hippocampal formation. Okay, so that is mammillary. And there is one more nucleus not seen here, that is the lateral nucleus. So its stimulation, it will induce eating. Okay, that you eat more on the stimulation. So these are the nuclei of hypothalamus. Next is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Okay, so now here, what happens, what is the importance here? Okay, so so they ask what is the importance of hypothalamo-hypophyseal axis. So what does it do? Now see, hypothalamo or to the hypophysis. Okay, so basically it is the connection between the hypothalamus as well as the uh, pituitary gland. Okay, so one thing is we have the gonadotropin that is stimulating, right? So hormones, that is preoptic nucleus will do that thing, as well as we have the the arcuate nucleus, which produces the hypothalamic releasing factors. So basically they will be acting on which one? The adenohypophysis, and cause the release of the anterior pituitary hormones. Now here in the supraoptic nucleus, we have the supraoptic part, we have the supraoptic nucleus and paraventricular nucleus, right? Okay, so here, these fibers which arise from the supraoptic and the paraventricular what is that, nuclei, they project into the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, okay, as the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. So this is also called as the supraoptic hypophyseal tract, okay. So the hormones oxytocin and vasopressin are released here. Okay, vasopressin is released from the supraoptic, okay, vasopressin, and from the paraventricular, we have the oxytocin, which are released, and they are transported to the posterior pituitary, okay, along these. So, these terminal ends of these axons, which arise from here, we call them as the herring bodies, okay. So, herring bodies, they basically store those hormones, right? They'll keep them for some time before it is released into the capillaries. Okay, so that is the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. So basically vasopressin is an antidiuretic hormone. It causes vasoconstriction and causes increased absorption of water in the distal convoluted tubule of the kidney. Okay, oxytocin, it is basically causes the contraction of the uterine musculature. Okay, as well as it also causes contraction of the scissor on the alveoli of the mammary gland too. Okay, so that is the function. So functions of the hypothalamus, so autonomic control. So basically the anterior part controls the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, that is anterior part of the hypothalamus. It controls the parasympathetic, whereas the posterior part is in relation to the sympathetic nervous system. Then endocrine control. So endocrine control, the hypothalamus will be sensitive to the circulating hormonal levels, providing a negative or positive. So based on that, either a positive feedback or a negative feedback it takes and controls the or regulates the level of hormones. Okay. Then neurosecretion. So neurosecretion, basically it secretes the oxytocin and the vasopressin. It regulates the food and water intake. Okay, so because it has got both the hunger center as well as satiety center. Okay, and a thirst center is also located there in the lateral nucleus. Okay, so basically it regulates the food and water intake. Then emotional expressions. Emotional expressions like laughing, crying, sweating, blushing, they are expressed when there is an integrated activity of the autonomic nervous system with the and the somatic efferent system. Somatic efferent system and autonomic nervous system, because of the integrated activity between that, it regulates the emotional expressions. Okay, so it regulates the sexual behavior and reproduction, that is by the secretion of gonadotropin hormones. Okay, then temperature regulation. So the anterior nucleus and the posterior nucleus will cause it regulate the temperature by dissipating the heat, whereas the other one, it conserves the heat. That is the posterior nucleus will conserve the heat. Okay. Biological clock. So it basically, it regulates the cyclical activities of the body. Okay. So basically the wakening cycle and the waking cycle and the sleeping cycle. Okay. So basically the circadian rhythm for all the body functions is about 24 hours. Okay, so next short essay question is the fourth ventricle and its boundaries. So it is asked in December 19 RS3 paper, and a part of it, like rhomboid fossa. Rhomboid fossa is nothing but the floor of the fourth ventricle. So it is asked in January 12, December 6, okay, and January 6, December 16, January 6, RS3 batch. So it's very commonly asked. So fourth ventricle is a very common question which is commonly asked in the university exams. Okay. So what is fourth ventricle now? Fourth ventricle is the cavity of the hindbrain. Okay. Hindbrain cavity. Here we see the fourth ventricle. So this has got, so it is a tent-like. So if you see here, it is a tent-like cavity of the hindbrain. Okay. So it is lined by the ependyma and it is filled with the CSF. So where it is situated, where is its location? It is located in the posterior cranial fossa, right? Yeah. It is located in the posterior cranial fossa, and there it lies in front of this is the cerebellum. So it lies in front of the cerebellum and behind the posterior and the upper. So the posterior, okay, behind the posterior part of the pons as well as the posterior part of pons as well as the upper part of the medulla. Here we see the fourth ventricle. Okay, so the recesses of the fourth ventricle. So recesses, there are about 5 recesses. Okay, so basically it's the extensions. Recesses are nothing but the extensions. So it has got 2 lateral recesses. These are the 2 lateral recesses, one on each side, and it extends laterally. Okay, it extends laterally, and the interval between inferior cerebellar peduncle ventrally and the peduncle of flocculus dorsally. Okay, so this is one which will be communicating also with the foramen of Lashka. Okay, and then there is median dorsal. Okay, dorsal median recess. Okay, this will extend into the white core of the cerebellum and lies just above the nodule. That is nodule of the cerebellum. Okay. Then there are 2 dorsolateral recesses, one on each side. They project dorsally above the inferior medullary vellum. Okay, I'll tell you what is that in medullary vellum and all. So it is basically, it is located dorsally above the inferior medullary vellum and lateral to the nodule. Okay, so now coming to the boundaries. Boundaries now, it has got lateral walls, roof and floor. Okay. So if you see laterally, it is bounded by, okay, bounded by the inferolateral. Superolaterally, this is the superior cerebellar peduncle will be there. And inferolaterally, there will be the inferior cerebellar peduncles. So here, if you see superiorly, because here cerebellar peduncle and inferiorly will be the inferior cerebellar peduncle, okay, which is supplemented by gracile and the cuneate nucleus. So that is the lateral boundaries. We can see that. I will show you again in another picture. So this picture is for the roof of the fourth ventricle. So roof of the fourth ventricle, if you see, it is tent shaped. Okay, it is tent shaped and it has a upper part, okay, upper and lower sloping surface. So the apex of the tongue extends posteriorly into the white core of the cerebellum. Okay. It extends little bit into the white core of the cerebellum. And the upper part of the roof, if you see, it is formed by the convergence of the two superior cerebellar peduncles. So here what happens is, between these two cerebellar peduncles, there is a thin sheet of white matter. This thin sheet of white matter is called as the superior medullary vellum. Okay. So this bridges the gap between the two superior cerebellar peduncles. So on this one will be the lingula. So if you see, in relation to this will be the lingula of the superior vermis of the cerebellum. The lower part of the roof is formed by a thin sheet. So here, see, this was made up of white matter, and white matter is what? The axons of the neurons, isn't it? So that is made up of nervous tissue, whereas this one is a non-nervous tissue, the inferior medullary vellum. Okay, it is formed mainly by the that is the ventricular ependyma and the pia mater of the pia mater, which covers it posteriorly. So this will be related to the nodule. Okay. And the lower part of this inferior will have a foramen here with larger aperture, which is known as the foramen of Magendie. Okay. So Magendie, through which the cavity of the fourth ventricle will be communicating with the subarachnoid space of the that is cerebromedullary system, which we studied in the other class. Okay. Okay, so this is the tila choroidae, which we will see. Tila choroidae is basically the choroid plexus, which we will see there. Now coming to the floor of the fourth ventricle. Now this is the floor of the fourth ventricle, which can be asked in both the ways. Okay, as a part of the describe the fourth ventricle, where you have to describe the all the features, that is the recesses, the location, the recesses, okay, and the roof, lateral boundaries. Okay, all those things you need to tell. But if it is only rhomboid fossa of floor of the fourth ventricle, then you need to draw only this diagram, need label it and explain it. Okay. So now here, if you see, now this is the superior cerebellar peduncle. Here we had the inferior cerebellar peduncle with the this. That is, we had the posteriorly we have cuneate and the gracile tubercle. This is the cuneate and the gracile tubercle is present. Okay, now here, if you see the floor, now this purple thing, this entire inside part is the floor of the fourth ventricle. Okay, so the floor of the entire floor of the fourth ventricle is divided into right and left halves. Okay, symmetrical. Okay, equal halves. It is divided by a median sulcus. Okay, so either side of this median sulcus, okay, there is a elevated longitudinal elevation, which is called as the median eminence. Okay, so this is the elevation. So this was the median sulcus. So on either side of it, there is an elevation, which we call it as the medial eminence. So the medial eminence is bounded again laterally by this one. This is the sulcus limitans, okay? So sulcus limitans. So sulcus limitans is present all along there. Okay, so and the region which is more lateral to the sulcus limitans will be the vestibular area. So this is from the median plane to lateral. Okay, so there is median sulcus, then we have the median eminence, then we have the this one sulcus limitans and the vestibular area. Okay, now the superior end of the sulcus limitans, it will widen. Okay, it will widen into a triangular depression, which we can see here. It widens into a triangular depression. And this depression, which is called as the superior fovea. Okay, superior fovea is there. Above the superior fovea, the sulcus limitans, okay, above the here. Okay, above the superior fovea, the sulcus limitans will flatten and present a bluish gray area. Okay, this area, which we call it as the locus ceruleus. So here that color is imparted by the underlying group of nerve cells that contain melanin pigment, which constitutes the substantia ferruginosa. Okay, ferrugina. So, okay, so this is basically forms a part of the substantia ferruginea. Okay, this is basically the pigment present there. Then here, and another thing is this, what is that? Locus ceruleus, no? The neurons there also contains, you would have studied in physiology, they also contain large amounts of norepinephrine. Okay, norepinephrine or noradrenaline is present. Okay, so the lowermost of the sulcus here, this is the lowermost part of the sulcus. Okay, it will have a oval opening. Okay, at the level of the superior fovea, and this is called, okay, this is the inferior fovea. Here you can see. Okay, so the lowermost part of the sulcus limited, it will have a small depression here, which is called as the inferior fovea. Now, on either side of this, now this is the median eminence, right? So, on either side of the median eminence, there will be a swelling, which is known as the fascia colliculus. Okay, this is the facial colliculate, which is formed by the, actually the motor root of the facial nerve winding around the abducent nucleus. Okay. Then here, if you see from this, this is the inferior fovea, right? So this is the lower end depression of the sulcus limitans. So from here, what happens is the sulcus limitans descends obliquely. Okay, it descends obliquely towards the median sulcus, and because of that, it divides this portion of the median sulcus into two parts. So this part we call it as, this is the hypoglossal triangle, okay, and this is the vagal triangle. This is the hypoglossal and this is the vagal triangle. Okay. What else is left? Yeah. So this vagal triangle here, it is traversed by a narrow translucent ridge called as the funiculus separatus. Okay. So this line is the funiculus separatus. Okay, so the small area between the funiculus separatus and the gracile tubercle, okay, funiculus separatus will be above and the gracile tubercle here, the small area is called as the area postrema, okay, so it contains, it basically consists of highly vascular neuroglial tissue. Okay, now here if you clearly see this, because of the sulcus limitans moving obliquely and these dividing these areas, this looks like the nib of the pen. So that is why this is called as the calamus scriptorius. Okay, scriptorius. Then here, inferior lateral margins of the fourth ventricle, okay, they are marked by the narrow white ridge called as the tinea. Okay, so these are the things. And this lower hand where this tinea will go down. No? So this area, we call it as the obex. So these are the things which you need to basically draw a neat label diagram and label it. And as you label it, try to explain what each structure is. Okay, so this is what. And here crossing this, no, that will be the upper portion, upper area and lower area. So this will be in region to the medulla. This is in region to the pons. So that will be divided by this striae medullaris. Okay. So same thing, the rhomboid fossa, we write the same thing, but only regarding the floor. We don't write anything else. Short essay question. Next question is caudate nucleus. So caudate nucleus was asked in December 10 RS2 paper and December 19 RS3. Okay. So here, whenever you write any answer, always there should be a skeleton for that. Okay. Like under what headings are you going to describe it? So caudate nucleus is described under definition, location, parts and relations. So what it is now, caudate nucleus is here. It is a large comma-shaped mass of gray matter which surrounds the thalamus. Okay. Here you can see. So, which it is surrounding, this is the thalamus. It surrounds the thalamus and itself, okay, here. And it's itself surrounded by the lateral ventricle. Okay, so that will be surrounded here. Above will be the, now what we are seeing, this dotted line is the lateral ventricle. Its whole length of convexity projects into the, so if you see here, this entire thing will be projecting into the cavity of the lateral ventricle. Now this caudate nucleus has parts, okay? So it has a head, body and tail. Okay, so head is large part here. So here if you see, it has got, this is the head portion, this is the body and this is the tail portion, okay? So head is large and rounded and forms the floor of the lateral ventricle of the that is the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle, okay, lateral wall it forms. Okay, so here the bands of this gray matter connecting it to the putamen across the anterior limb of the internal capsule are seen. This is the bands of the gray matter. So the body is long and narrow and forms the floor. Okay, the body is long and narrow and it will be forming the floor of the central part of lateral ventricle. So you can see here. So this will be forming the floor of the central part of lateral ventricle. So here it is separated from the thalamus by the thalamostriate. Okay, thalamostriate fibers, thalamostriate vein separates the thalamus from this body. Okay, then the tail is long. So if you see the tail, this is the tail. The tail is long and slender and forms the roof of the inferior horn of lateral ventricle. So it terminates anteriorly in the amygdaloid body. So if you see, this is the floor of the, uh, this is the lateral horn of the uh, lateral ventricle. So it is forming the roof of that. Okay, it is the inferior horn. Not lateral horn, inferior horn of the uh, lateral ventricle, inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. So it is forming the roof of that. So that you write for caudate nucleus. Next is corpus callosum. So corpus callosum, how do you explain? So definition, parts, relations, functions, and applied anatomy. So what is corpus callosum? Corpus callosum is the largest commissural fibers, okay, commissural fibers of the brain, which connects the cerebral. So these white matter, no, they are classified into association fibers, commissural fibers, okay, and projection fibers. So this belongs to the commissural fibers. Okay, so this corpus callosum so this is among the commissural fibers, this is the largest and it connects the two cerebral hemispheres, okay? So it is about 10 centimeter. If you see, it is about 10 centimeter long and has about 300 million fibers it will be carrying within it. So this corpus callosum, you should remember that it connects all the parts of the brain, neocortex of the two hemispheres, except for the lower and anterior parts of temporal lobe, okay? Except for this portion, if you see, rest everything it connects. Now the parts of the corpus callosum. So if you see from the front to back, like, we have the rostrum, the genu, the trunk, body, and the splenium. Okay, the trunk or the body and the splenium. Okay, so this is a spotter question, an important 3-mark question too. In our MCQs, it can be asked. So what is genu now? Okay, so genu, if you think here, you see here, it is a thick curved anterior extremity of the corpus callosum, which lies 4 centimeter behind the front. This is the frontal lobe. From here, about 4 centimeters behind it lies. Okay, so this genu, it forms, so if you see the lateral ventricle, it forms the anterior boundary of the anterior horn of lateral ventricle. This is the rostrum. So the genu will extend downwards and backwards as a prolongation, as a thin prolongation. Okay, so you can see to join the lamina terminalis. Okay, so this forms this is basically the genu itself, which is extending downwards like a thin projection. So that projection, we call it as the rostrum. So this rostrum, if you see, it will form the floor of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay, and its fibers will be extending inferiorly to connect the orbital surfaces of the two frontal lobes. Then we have the trunk. So this is the trunk. So the trunk is the middle part of the corpus callosum, and it's thick anterior, and it's which is lies between its anterior end, that is genu, and posterior end, that is splenium. So these fibers, corpus callosum, that is basically that body or the trunk part of it, no, it will connect all most of the frontal as well as the anterior parts of parietal lobe of the two cerebral hemispheres. The central part of this corpus callosum, it also forms the roof of the central part of lateral ventricle. Okay. Then we have the splenium. The splenium, where behind it is a very massive posterior extremity of the corpus callosum. So it lies about 6 centimeters in front of the occipital pole. So here it will be overlapping the thalamus, the pulvina, pineal glands, and rectum of the midbrain. The fibers of the splenium will be connecting the posterior parts of the parietal lobe and temporal and occipital lobes of the two hemispheres. Okay. So where it is in relation, so those same lobes, it will be connected. Now here anteriorly, see the corpus callosum, when we see it, it will be seen below that median fissure which divides the two cerebral hemispheres, isn't it? Okay, so now here, so anteriorly the corpus callosum is not there, posteriorly also corpus callosum is not there. So here what happens, because of that, this is the fissure, this portion is the corpus callosum. The fibers will sweep. Okay, here if you can see, these fibers will sweep like this, okay? That is, they curve forward on each side into the anterior part of the frontal lobes, forming a fork-like structure. Okay, so this is called as the forceps minor. Okay, the fibers of the splenium connecting the occipital lobes sweep backwards on either side. Okay, just above the calcarine sulcus, forming a large fork-like structure which is called as the forceps major. Okay, so this portion is forceps major, this is portion forceps minor. Now the forceps major, what happens is it forms a swelling, okay, in the upper part of the medial wall of the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle and the bulb of the posterior horn. Okay, then you should know here there is a small bundle of fibers which is known as tapetum also. So tapetum is nothing but a thick lamina of white fibers. So if you see here, it is about 2 centimeter thick and it forms the roof and lateral horn of the posterior, lateral wall of the posterior horn and lateral wall of the inferior horn of lateral ventricle. Okay, so it forms both the roof as well as the lateral wall of the posterior horn of posterior horn, as well as it also forms the lateral wall of the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. Okay. Now, what is this tapetum? It is formed by those fibers of the trunk and splenium of corpus callosum, which are not intersected by the fibers of corona radiata. So in coronal section, if you see, the tapetum looks whiter than the surrounding white matter because the section passes parallel to the fibers of the tapetum. Okay, next coming to the relations. Okay, corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is a very commonly asked question and it's very important. So when we take a sagittal section here, this is the corpus callosum. Okay, so once you understand the diagram, it is easy to draw. Don't try to just mug the things and just draw the diagram. Understand the diagram, draw it, and then study the relations. So you will be able to get the correlation. So sagittal section here, if you see, it is seen as a C-shaped mass of white matter on the medial surface of the hemisphere, okay, where it forms the roof of the lateral ventricle. Now the concave inferior surface, this is the concave inferior surface of corpus callosum. It is attached with the convex superior surface of the fornix by the septum. Okay, this is the septum pellucidum. Okay, so it will be connected to the fornix. So it's convex, this one is the convex superior aspect. It is covered by a thin layer of gray matter, which is called as the indusium griseum. Okay. So through this indusium griseum, what happens? The fibers fiber bundles of bilateral, medial, and lateral longitudinal striae will be present within that. Then the anterior cerebral vessels, they will be lying on the pia mater, covering its superior aspect of the corpus callosum. So the superior here, if you see, is covered by each side by the cingulate. Okay, this is the cingulate gyrus from which it is separated by a callosal sulcus here. Okay. So what is the function of corpus callosum? It is mainly responsible for interhemispheric transfer of information, and it is essential for bilateral responses and in learning process, isn't it? Sometimes it will not connect. It will be separate, okay? Right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. So that time we get what we call it as the split brain syndrome. Okay, so if the corpus callosum is congenitally absent or sectioned, okay, surgically, what happens, each cerebral hemisphere, it becomes isolated and the patient responds as if he or she has two separate brains. Okay, it is called as the split brain syndrome. So now here, lesions of the anterior corpus callosum results in akinetic mutism. Okay, akinetic mutism and tactile anomia, whereas lesions of the posterior corpus callosum results in alexia with agraphia. Okay, next question is internal capsule of the brain. So location, shape, boundaries, paths, the constituent fibers, blood supply, and applied aspects you need to write. So what is this internal capsule? So internal capsule is a compact bundle of, now this is projection fibers, corpus striatum, corpus callosum was what type? It was the commissural fibers. Now this is the projection fibers. So where it is present? It is present between the thalamus and the medial head, medially. Okay, so this is the thalamus and this is the caudate head of the caudate nucleus. Whereas this side, it is related to, okay, so lentiform nucleus. So lentiform nucleus is laterally placed, whereas the head of the caudate nucleus and the thalamus are medially placed. So when we do a horizontal section, the internal capsule appears like a V-shaped compact bundle of white fibers. So this internal capsule is divided into 5 parts. Okay, so you should know what is this. So first is the anterior limb. So anterior limb, if you see here, when you know the diagram, you can just read this diagram. So, okay. So anterior limb, it is located where? Between the head of the caudate nucleus medially and the anterior part of the lentiform nucleus laterally. Then we have the posterior limb between the thalamus medially and the posterior part of the lentiform nucleus laterally. Then genu is the bend where between the posterior and the the anterior and the posterior limb. So this is the bend here. Okay. Then retrolentiform part will lie behind the lentiform nucleus and sublentiform part lies below the lentiform nucleus. So you should know, we do not ask the entire pathway in anatomy, but you should know what fibers are going through each of this part. Now, anterior part, which there are both motor and sensory fibers going. Okay. So anterior part, the motor fibers which are coming there will be the frontopontine fibers, whereas sensory fibers will be from the anterior nucleus of thalamus, the anterior thalamic radiation. Then genu frontopontine, which includes both corticonuclear and corticospinal fibers, and sensory fibers are through superior thalamic radiation. Posterior limb will carry frontopontine, corticospinal, and corticorubral fibers. Okay, it carries all these 3. And sensory fibers are superior thalamic radiation. Then the other 2 parts, that the retrolentiform and the sublentiform, both will, motor fibers will be parietopontine and the occipitopontine, whereas sensory fibers will be the posterior thalamic radiation and inferior thalamic radiation. Okay, so this is how the different fibers are located in the different parts, and you can those fibers, they relay through this. Okay, so this is the thalamic radiation by which it is projected into the different lobes. Okay, from the thalamus. second or third order neurons, they project like this from the nuclei into the different portions of the thalamus. Next, very important is the blood supply of the internal capsule. So the internal capsule is supplied by, one is there are five arteries mainly, okay? So one is the medial and striate branches of the middle cerebral artery. Okay, of the middle cerebral. So one of the lateral branches here, okay, it is large and it will frequently gets ruptured. That is known as Charcot. Okay, so that vessel which ruptures, no, it is often called as the Charcot's artery of cerebral hemorrhage because it ruptures and causes hemorrhage. So it enters through the anterior perforated substance and it will be supplying the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Then there are striate branches of anterior, okay, the anterior cerebral, this is the anterior cerebral artery from the striate branches. So one of the branches is large and takes a recurrent course. Okay, so this artery, since it recurrent means it goes behind like that and supplies the structure. So recurrent artery is, it is known as the Huebner's, okay. So it will arise just proximal to the anterior communicating artery. Okay, so here it will arise. This is the recurrent artery of Huebner. Okay, and it supplies mainly the genu and the anterior limb of the internal capsule. Then there are central branches of the anterior choroidal. Okay, so here this is the anterior choroidal. There are central branches of the anterior choroidal artery and they will be supplying the sublentiform part. Some branches directly from the internal carotid to the genu. Okay, so it will supply, and some direct branches from the internal carotid artery will also supply the genu, and central branches, okay, of the posterior communicating artery will supply, and lateral central branches of the posterior cerebral artery will supply the retrolentiform and sublentiform part. Okay, so what you have to remember is basically it has a very good blood supply. So ruptures, any damage to the internal capsule results in hemorrhage or infarction leading to loss of sensations as well as spastic paralysis of the opposite half of the body can be, okay, it can occur. Then there is the artery of hemorrhage. One is the Charcot's artery of cerebral hemorrhage. Another one is the recurrent artery of Huebner. Okay, so these two things you need to keep in mind. Then short answer, one is paracentral lobule. Now, okay, so this is also commonly asked question, 19 and 14 IS3 paper. So here you answer it as in very briefly, where is its location, boundaries and function. So it is located on the medial surface of the cerebrum. Okay, so what is it? It is the highest cortical center for micturition and defecation. And the paracentral, okay, so here next is boundaries. The paracentral lobule now is bounded above by the superomedial boundary, okay, below by the cingulate gyrus. And here, okay, this is the anterior part. Okay. This is the posterior by the upturned posterior end of the cingulate gyrus. Okay, so this is the paracentral lobule. Okay, superomedial border is here. This is the cingulate sulcus, and posteriorly up and posterior it will be the posterior end of the cingulate upturned end. So cingulate gyrus, this is the cingulate sulcus. Okay, this is the see, this is the callosal sulcus. This is the cingulate gyrus. This is the cingulate sulcus. So this one went and offshoot here. It gives, okay. So this is where the paracentral lobule will lie. So here I told you in the beginning, the body is represented upside down. So the perineum is represented here. So that is why the higher centers for cortic micturition and defecation is located there. Then we have Broca's speech area. So this is also very repeatedly asked question. So here when it is asked as a 3 marks, what to write? Okay, so first is the location, area number, functional and applied aspects. So Broca's speech area is the motor speech area located in pars triangularis 44 and for pars opercularis and triangularis. Okay. Uh, yeah. And where does it lie? It lies here. That is the inferior frontal gyrus of the frontal lobe. Okay. So basically the occupies the pars triangularis and pars opercularis part. So in 30% of the cases, it is present in the right hemisphere, okay, where the persons are left-handed. But it is responsible for, and what is its function? It is responsible for the production of speech or vocalization. Okay. So when we ask a question to the patient, he's understanding the question, but is not able to give the answer or reply properly. Okay. So that is what happens in Broca's area. So how does it bring about the connection, or how does it bring about that speech? It forms these words with the connection with the adjacent primary motor areas, which will stimulate the muscles of the larynx, mouth, tongue, soft palate, and the respiratory. Okay. So the lesions of the motor speech area results in the loss of ability to produce speech, that is expressive aphasia. So it is also called as motor aphasia. So here the patient retains the ability to think about the words. He can understand what they want to say, but they are not able to write the words. They can understand when they see or hear them. Okay, so the language is understood, but it cannot be expressed in speech. Okay, it cannot be, as I said, it cannot be expressed in the speech. Okay, uh, even though there is no paralysis, still it cannot be expressed. Then coming to the next question, that is calcarine sulcus, very commonly asked question, as you can see here. Okay, so how will you answer? Location, extent, functional area, and importance. So calcarine sulcus. So this is the calcarine sulcus is present on the medial surface of the cerebral hemisphere. It begins as a deep fissure, just a little closer to the posterior end of this. This is the splenium. Okay. So at the posterior end of the corpus callosum, it begins and follows an arched course with the convexity. With the like when it arches, no, the convexity is towards the upper part. Okay, towards the occipital pole. So here, basically, it is important because the primary visual area is situated in the walls and the floor of the posterior part of the calcarine sulcus. Okay. So here what happens, impulses from the superior, okay, this is an important point, but the superior retinal quadrants, that is the superior retinal quadrants when we say, basically that is the inferior field of vision. It passes to the superior wall of the calcarine sulcus, and while the inferior quadrants, the superior field of vision is there, passes through the inferior wall of the calcarine sulcus. So with this, we complete the class. Okay, good day to all. And thanks for watching Auricle. For more content, you can follow the social media handles on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Telegram. Okay, and if you haven't yet downloaded the app, kindly do that, which you can get on Google Play and App Store, and start your journey towards success with Auricle. Until then, next time.